Bobby DeBarge's voice made millions for Motown. But when he asked for his own solo deal in 1981, everything fell apart. The label said yes. The contract was signed. Then the drugs took over. Sessions stretched from months to years. His younger brother got famous instead. By the time Bobby walked into prison in 1988, his dream was already dead. And the darkest part? He knew it was coming. Today, we're revealing what really happened behind those closed studio doors. Bobby DeBarge entered the world with trouble already sitting at the table. He was born Robert Louis DeBarge Jr. on March 5, 1956, in Detroit, Michigan. And even that simple fact carried weight. His father, Robert DeBarge Sr., was a white Army soldier. His mother, Etterline Abney, was black. In the mid-1950s, in an industrial Midwest that still treated interracial families like a problem to be punished, that mix did not bring protection. It brought attention. And inside their home, the attention turned inward fast. People close to the family later described Robert Sr. as domineering and cruel, and they said he used his whiteness like a weapon in the house instead of a shield outside it. So Bobby's earliest memories were not soft ones. They were sharp, loud, full of tension. As the oldest of what would become 10 children, he watched his parents' marriage collapse in real time. And it was not a quiet collapse. It was control, fear, and violence building year after year until the separation and divorce in the early 1970s, when he was still a teenager. And in that cramped, chaotic home, it felt like pregnancy and violence arrived on the same schedule. Etterline ultimately had 10 children with Robert Sr., and accounts describe him as a man who kept his wife constantly pregnant, while routinely beating her, often in front of the kids. One sibling later recalled that he was notorious for being domineering and physically abusive, and the attacks were described as severe enough to leave bruises people could see and scars nobody could. The children learned a brutal rule early. Any noise could set him off, any mistake. Then it was punches, slaps, being slammed into walls. For Bobby, who was already watching this by about age 5, home stopped feeling like home. It felt like a war zone that never called a ceasefire. Years later, when people saw the handsome, soft-spoken falsetto star, they did not see the child stuck in a house of secrets. Then, the family's own words made the picture even darker. A DeBarge sibling later stated that Robert Sr. not only beat the children, but sexually molested a lot of my brothers and sisters. Other accounts say at least the oldest 5 children were sexually abused, and Bobby, as the eldest son, was described as taking the bulk of it. These were not outsider rumors floating around a scene. They were claims coming from inside the family, from people who lived it. Robert Sr. later died in 2009, described by One Piece as dying with a guilty conscience, never publicly held to account for what he was said to have done, while the damage kept moving forward through the lives of the children he left behind. Still, even in that kind of nightmare, something inside Bobby kept looking for a door that led out. Music became that door. Around age 13, as the family leaned toward church for stability, he found the piano, and it was like his hands already knew what to do. He could mimic complex Stevie Wonder riffs by ear without formal lessons. Church musicians noticed it right away. He could hear a chord once and play it back almost exactly. And sometimes he would add his own twist, like he could not help it. But even that gift had to be handled carefully at home. Creativity could be dangerous when a father's anger could explode at any moment. So practicing often happened in whispers, in stolen minutes, when Robert Sr. was out or passed out. The piano became an escape and a confession booth at the same time. He could pour fear into notes because saying the truth out loud still felt impossible. Then, at 15, another door opened, and it was the wrong one. Around 1971, the same streets that fed him music also handed him heroin. Sources describe it as beginning in teenage hangs with older kids, where pills and powder felt like a quick way to numb a pain he never spoke about. It did not stay casual. It turned into what many later called his lifelong addiction. The habit dug in so deep that the years that followed became a loop of withdrawal, relapse, secrecy, and shame. Even while his talent kept dragging him toward bigger rooms and brighter stages. Retrospectives describe it lasting roughly 24 years, right up until his death in 1995 at age 39 from AIDS-related complications. That means one choice made before he was even old enough to drive ended up shaping almost his entire adult life. By 1972, the family finally broke away from Detroit's violence. After roughly 19 years of a marriage that began in 1953, Ederline divorced Robert Sr. and relocated the children to Grand Rapids, Michigan. They moved near her brother, Bishop William C. Abney Jr. at Bethel Pentecostal Church, hoping church life could protect the kids and bring some order back. Bobby was about 15 or 16 then. He was already using heroin by the early 1970s, and he carried it like a private survival trick. In Grand Rapids, he started slipping into local bar bands, playing keyboards and singing covers in smoky neighborhood clubs for small cash. Sometimes skipping school because the night felt safer than the day. Music was his first serious way out, even if it came wrapped in late hours and bad company. As 1971 turned into 1972, Bobby and his younger brother Tommy kept searching for any band that would let them plug in and disappear into the noise. Fan accounts often identify one of those early funk outfits as Peach Cream. It was bar circuits, Friday and Saturday nights, tiny stages squeezed near pool tables and beer coolers. They played radio hits people recognized, including Stevie Wonder's Superstition, released in October 1972 and still surging in early 1973. They would stretch it past 7 minutes so Bobby could show off that falsetto and those clavinet-style keyboard licks. The pay was rough. Sometimes it was around $50 a night for the whole group, split between members, which meant Bobby might stumble home at 2 a.m. with just enough for gas, food, and then, quietly, a little more heroin to keep his nerves from collapsing before the next rehearsal. The pattern was already setting. Joy on stage, damage off stage. Then, in 1975, a chance friendship kicked the door to a bigger world. In Grand Rapids jam sessions, Bobby befriended saxophonist Gregory Williams, an ambitious musician from Kansas City who was building a serious touring group. Williams recruited Bobby and others into a band that soon caught the attention of Barry White's camp. They became White's backing group under the name White Heat, moved to California, and cut a self-titled album released in 1975 on White's label. For a kid who had been hustling tiny stages for scraps, it should have felt like the beginning of everything. But the ground did what it always did under Bobby. It shifted. In 1976, Barry White was hit by a tax-related financial mess, and White Heat was abruptly dropped. Support got cut. The young musicians were suddenly stranded in Los Angeles with almost no money, no return tickets, and Bobby already trying to manage a growing heroin habit in a city overflowing with cheap, powerful drugs. That is where the secret started turning into a daily ritual. People close to the group later recalled him shooting up in cheap motel bathrooms before White Heat shows and then early Switch performances, timing it so the rush would peak as he walked on stage. He wore long-sleeved shirts, even under hot lights, hiding needle marks climbing up his arms while he hit impossibly high notes and stacked tight harmonies like nothing was wrong. And the crowd never knew. They heard a perfect voice. They did not see a body living in constant chemical collapse. After White Heat fell apart, Gregory Williams reshaped the group in 1976 and 1977 into a new project called Switch. a name meant to hint at how they could change instruments and roles mid-song, they cut a rough demo in Los Angeles, built around an early version of the ballad that would become There'll Never Be, with Bobby layering his 4-octave falsetto into choirs of overdubbed voices. Then the tape reached Jermaine Jackson at a Motown gathering in late 1977. Multiple accounts say Jermaine stopped the room, replayed Bobby's lead, and pushed Motown to sign them quickly. It happened fast. A band that had been dropped and left broke not long before was suddenly in Motown's pipeline. It felt like a miracle. In 1978, Switch released its debut album on Motown's Gordy imprint, and There'll Never Be took off. The song climbed to number 6 on the US R&B chart and reached number 36 on the Billboard Hot 100, their only top 40 pop hit. The debut album was certified gold, and by 1979, it had sold over 500,000 copies in the US, with later sales pushing it past the 1 million mark worldwide, giving Bobby a kind of calling card that looked like victory from the outside. On radio, his falsetto was suddenly sitting in the same lane as the biggest voices of that era. And for a kid who had been strung out and scrambling, hearing himself everywhere had to feel like redemption. But redemption does not automatically erase the hurt that created you. So even while the numbers climbed, Bobby was still carrying the same damage. Around age 19 or 20, during the mid-1970s Grand Rapids and early Los Angeles period, he reportedly fathered a child out of wedlock, a son he barely acknowledged as his career and heroin dependence accelerated. People around the story describe it as one of those quiet, hidden chapters, a child who carried the blood, but not the presence. It fit a pattern that had been building for years, trauma turning into secrecy, secrecy turning into distance, and distance turning into harm that spreads. By 1979, Switch 2 arrived and did it again. Another gold album, driven by another Bobby DeBarge composition, I Call Your Name, which reached number 8 on the R&B chart. On shows like American Bandstand and Soul Train, his live runs shocked audiences because he would jump from chest voice to that glass-bright falsetto in one line, like he was taking a risk every time he opened his mouth. Motown insiders even started calling Switch the New Miracles because, like Smokey Robinson's group, they wrote, played, and had a lead voice that could stop a room cold. It all looked like a clean climb. Then reality kept leaking through the cracks. During a 1978 tour stop, while closing the set with Best Beat in Town, the band stretched the song into a long funk workout. Somewhere around the middle, Bobby, described as 24 and coming off a heroin binge, reportedly nodded off on stage, his mic slipping toward the floor. The band covered it on instinct. They extended the drum break. They vamped. They made it sound like a planned improvisation so the crowd would not panic. But backstage, the mood flipped hard. The people around him understood what it meant. The voice selling the tickets was also the biggest threat to the entire machine. Even the money, the part everyone assumes is good, carried poison. On paper, the late 1970s run looked huge. Multiple gold albums, TV spots, touring, hit singles. Yet accounts describe Bobby's weekly take-home as barely around $200 even at their height. Family accounts also claim Motown controlled the masters and kept roughly 80% of the publishing income from songs Bobby wrote or co-wrote, including There'll Never Be and I Call Your Name. So after managers, taxes, and recoupable tour expenses, the man whose falsetto was filling theaters was still borrowing money for rent and drugs. That contrast is the kind that makes a person feel trapped, even while the world calls them famous. In 1981, Motown dangled a solo deal in front of Bobby DeBarge, and it hit him like a promise he had waited his whole life to hear. Switch was doing well, but Bobby wanted more than being the voice inside a group. So he walked out, thinking he was about to become Motown's next falsetto superstar. For a moment, it probably felt like the whole road was finally opening. Yet the truth was harsher, and it came slowly, day by day, like a dream turning into a bad room you cannot leave. By 1983, the solo plan was real on paper, and Bobby was 27, the exact age where labels love to believe a singer is ready to explode. The schedule was supposed to be simple: 6 months. Cut the tracks, polish them, roll them out. But then the sessions started stretching and stretching until they became a long fog that lasted across 1983 and 1984. Studio time got booked, then wasted. Engineers waited, musicians showed up, then sat around. Some nights Bobby did not come at all. Other nights he came in, and everyone could see it in his eyes before he even touched the mic. The drugs were not new. The cocaine and heroin had started back in the early 1970s. So by the time those solo sessions rolled around, it was not a habit anymore. It was a system, and that system was now deciding whether he could stand, whether he could focus, whether he could sing. People around him later described him nodding off at the console, then suddenly waking up and trying to record like nothing happened. He would push his voice hard, chasing that old magic, but the takes kept falling apart. Dozens of aborted tries, high notes cracking, runs missing their landing. The worst part was how clear the contrast felt to everyone in the room, because this was the same voice that had floated so clean on Switch's 1978 platinum hit, There'll Never Be. Back then, he hit those climactic lines like it was effortless. Now he was fighting to get through one keeper take. Some stories say he tried to cut a title track more than 20 times in a single night, and still could not hold it together because he was coming down. That is the kind of moment that breaks a person quietly, not with one loud failure, but with the same wall appearing again and again until you start to believe it will never move. Motown felt it too. At first, they waited. Then they adjusted. Then they pulled back. Budgets got cut. Dates got pushed. Excitement turned into polite distance. And by late 1984, the tapes were basically dead. The project was shelved, not with a dramatic announcement, but with silence. Bobby's solo album did not crash in public. It just vanished behind closed doors, leaving him with a reputation that stuck like a stain. And while his dream sat buried, the label's focus shifted inside his own house. In early 1985, DeBarge released Rhythm of the Night, and everything lit up for the family without him. The title track, written by Diane Warren, exploded. It hit number 1 on the R&B chart and number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. It went top 5 in the UK and spread across Europe and Australia. Suddenly, El DeBarge was Motown's new golden boy, and the machine moved fast. TV spots, big appearances, tie-ins linked to Berry Gordy's film The Last Dragon, with Rhythm of the Night featured right in the middle of that moment. So imagine what that felt like for Bobby. His own solo work was locked away. His name was being whispered like a warning in meetings. And the same label that once looked at him like a future star was now pouring its energy into the younger brother. By 1986, Motown was pushing El's self-titled solo album, and Who's Johnny became a #1 R&B hit. Meanwhile, Bobby was being used in smaller ways, brought in as a producer, pulled in later as a member during the weaker-selling 1987 album Bad Boys. He was there, but not really there. Like the architect who helped build the sound, then got locked out once the real money arrived. That pressure did not just stay in the business. It spilled into his personal life, too. His relationship with LaToya Jackson had started in the late 1970s, back when Switch was riding high and Motown still saw Bobby as a future centerpiece. Friends said he was obsessed. One story even says he slipped a nod to her song Nighttime Lover into the switch ballad You and I, like he was trying to press a private message into the grooves of vinyl. But by 1984, as his heroin and cocaine use escalated again, the romance collapsed. There is an account that describes an overdose scare at a Los Angeles party, something that terrified her and made her inner circle see him as a liability instead of a partner. After that, she pulled away, and the calls stopped. That kind of silence can hurt more than a headline, because you cannot argue with it. You just sit with it, already watching his solo dream die, already watching the family rise without him. He reportedly disappeared into a 3-day cocaine binge after that breakup, coming out gaunt, paranoid, and convinced he had lost the one person who might have pulled him back. Then, years later, he tried to build something that looked like normal. On December 10, 1990, Bobby married Terry Lee Gale, later known as Terry DeBarge, at 34 years old. People around them saw it as a last real shot at a steady life. They had 2 sons, Christian and Bobby III. Yet even fatherhood could not cut through the needle. Relatives later described scenes that still feel hard to picture without your chest tightening. Hospital rooms where people waited for him after the birth while he vanished on errands that were really dope runs. He would come back hours later, wired, or not come back at all. The bust that ended his freedom came on 28th of June 1988 at Detroit Metropolitan Airport. Agents said it began as a routine stop of arriving passengers. Chico and an associate named Dwayne Hill had just flown in from Los Angeles when federal drug agents and a trained dog focused on their carry-on bags and found tightly wrapped cocaine, about 1 kilogram in total, hidden inside. Instead of closing the case immediately, the DEA turned it into a trap. They ordered Chico and Hill to keep going under watch, to deliver the drugs to a contact in Michigan, while agents followed, hoping to reach the rest of the circle, including Bobby. By October 1988, a federal jury in Kalamazoo had found Bobby and Chico guilty of conspiring to smuggle more than 2 pounds of cocaine. On paper, Bobby now faced the possibility of life in prison and millions in fines. In January 1989, a federal judge finally sentenced him. He received a little more than 5 years in the federal system, including time to be served in a Wisconsin facility. A man who had once toured stadiums in the late 1970s now woke up each day as an inmate number. His routines were counts, head checks, strip searches, and the slow grind of time. Public records tell the legal side. Later interviews with friends and family add the emotional one. They describe a man deeply depressed, trapped between withdrawal from heroin and the shock of losing his freedom at just 32. The voice that had floated over "There'll never be" now belonged to someone sleeping on a concrete bunk beside a metal toilet, knowing that by the time he stepped out, the industry that had once chased him might barely remember him. Inside prison, his small fame made things worse, not better. Some inmates recognized him as the voice on Switch's 1978 hit "There'll Never Be," which had reached the R&B top 10 about a decade earlier. A few resented the idea of a former star doing time alongside them. Retrospectives and fan accounts say certain prisoners saw him as a sellout, a man who had money, talent, and access, yet still ended up in their world. That resentment turned into harassment and beatings. Guards responded the way many prisons do when a high-profile inmate becomes a target. They moved him into protective solitary. That meant 23 hours a day, locked in a cell not much bigger than a bathroom, with 1 hour to shower or walk in a cage. The isolation fed his cravings and his despair. The strain hit his family, too. The DeBarge household had already been marked by abuse, addiction, and legal trouble. Matriarch Etterline had watched more than one child slide into drugs long before Bobby's trafficking case. When news of his arrest and trial hit, she seemed torn between love and exhaustion. Public tributes and posts described the family wrestling with shame as their last name, once linked to Motown hits, appeared in federal court headlines next to kilograms of cocaine and long sentences. Some on-camera scenes of disowning and refused bail that appear in television movies are clearer than what survives in records. Still, there is consistent testimony that Bobby felt abandoned. He believed his success had turned into poison, that the family partly blamed his fall on the violent, domineering influence of his father, Robert DeBarge Sr., and on the destructive life that had grown around the music. His drug habit did not disappear when the cell door closed. Like many addicted inmates, he searched for ways to escape withdrawal. Prison stories and memorial posts describe him selling personal items, including jewelry, to get money for contraband drugs traded through the commissary network. In that underground system, rings and watches became quick currency with people who smuggled in heroin and other substances, often mixed with unknown fillers and passed around through shared needles. Sometime during this late 1980s sentence, Bobby tested positive for HIV. Tributes later linked the infection directly to his prison drug use. By the time he walked out in 1993, the virus had already started the countdown that would end with his death in 1995. Those years behind bars became both his lowest point and, in a strange way, one of his most creative stretches. From 1988 to 1993, he lived in a Wisconsin federal prison cell that functioned as both a small studio and a kind of death row. Sentenced for trafficking more than 2 pounds of cocaine, he saw the DeBarge family group effectively freeze, while his own career stopped at 32. Inside, he wrote around 20 songs on scraps of toilet paper and envelopes, hiding the lyrics under his mattress so guards would not throw them away. During this time, he quietly told relatives that he had contracted HIV before leaving prison, turning his sentence into a clock he could not stop. His weight dropped to about 120 pounds on a 6'2" frame. Symptoms of AIDS appeared in his body as sunken cheeks, repeated infections, and fatigue that kept him in bed for days. Fellow inmates later said that by the early 1990s, he looked 20 years older than his age, a once shining singer reduced to coughing fits and scribbled melodies in a concrete room. Even the birth of his son reached him through bars and layers of punishment. In 1990, while he was locked in maximum security after a prison fight, his wife Terry went into labor with their son, Bobby DeBarge III. They had married on 10th of December 1990, and he had scratched marks on a prison calendar, hoping he might be moved to a lower security unit in time to at least hear the birth over a phone. Instead, after an altercation tied to drug tensions inside, he was put in segregation for 23 hours a day. The news that his child had arrived did not come from a chaplain or official notice. It arrived in a smuggled letter slid under his door by another inmate who worked in the mailroom. The envelope had already been opened and folded back. Inside, Terry wrote about their baby's weight and his first cry. She described holding a tiny photo up to the hospital television when a DeBarge video came on, hoping that somehow Bobby would feel the moment from behind walls. One more letter almost broke him completely. While he was serving his sentence, word reached him that his younger brother Chico had cooperated with federal investigators after being caught with cocaine at Detroit Metropolitan Airport, giving them more details about the Grand Rapids Circle in exchange for a lighter punishment. In a family built around secrecy and a hard rule against informing, that knowledge cut deep. Bandmate Gregory Williams later recalled how Bobby spiraled after learning this. He locked himself in his cell, refused food, and told friends he wished the 1988 bust had killed him. One night he swallowed a handful of contraband pills, likely painkillers or tranquilizers, trying to end his life. Guards and medical staff revived him in the prison infirmary. He woke up handcuffed to a bed, his stomach pumped, his sentence still running. While all this unfolded, Motown's hold over his work tightened instead of easing. By the early 1990s, as he sat in a Wisconsin cell, the label was still receiving money from Switch and DeBarge hits like There'll Never Be and All This Love. They had already taken control of much of the family's publishing rights in the 1980s. Tension peaked when Motown lawyers pushed to recoup advances that Bobby could not possibly work off while locked up. His mother later said in interviews that the company had taken all of his publishing and continued to earn from those songs, even as he lay sick and broke. Internal accounting turned old tour support, studio costs, and promotional spending into recoupable advances, and then used royalty flow from Switch and DeBarge catalog to cancel those numbers out. By the time talks ended, most of Bobby's share of publishing, which might have been worth 7 figures over time as the record stayed in rotation, was gone. He walked out of prison in 1993, weighing a little over 120 pounds, with thinning hair and an immune system badly damaged. But he kept telling people he was just tired. Within a few months, he signed a management deal with German producer Bernd Lichters, who had connections back to his 1970s Hot Ice days. Under Lichters, he started recording a comeback album in 1994. Working mainly in California, he cut most of It's Not Over in about 6 weeks, using songs born from those toilet paper notes and envelope scraps in his cell. Studio photos from that time show a strangely smooth face. People present said makeup artists were told to cover spots and lesions that looked like Kaposi sarcoma, so that labels and fans would not suspect AIDS. The album finally came out in August 1995 on a small label called A&E Records, just weeks before he died on 16 August 1995 in a hospice in Grand Rapids at 39 years old. He never saw how that last record was received. Most of the independent compact discs reportedly stayed in boxes, unsold. Those final years were a mix of quiet neighborhood scenes and constant hidden fear. After his 1993 release, he tried to live a low-profile life in the suburbs while shaping the rough It's Not Over demos into finished songs. Under Bernd Lichters, he turned prison lyrics into open confessions about HIV, regret, and his failures as a father. One unreleased ballad, known among collectors as Game of Love, followed the same themes as the album: a man begging for time while knowing his body was failing. He had already told family he was HIV positive before his sentence was done, and the songs made that knowledge clear without naming it. No major label wanted to take a risk on a dying former falsetto star from the late 1970s with a drug record and a prison past, so It's Not Over appeared quietly on that small imprint. Many discs never even left storage. By August 1995, his world had narrowed to a room in a hospice in Grand Rapids, the same city he had moved to as a teenager after his parents separated. Official records state that he died there on 16 August 1995 at age 39 from complications related to AIDS after a 10-year struggle with heroin and cocaine. He had already served 5 years in a Wisconsin federal prison on the cocaine trafficking conviction from 1988, and his health had started to break not long after he got out in 1993 as HIV advanced into full AIDS. Friends like Gregory Williams later said, his last years were like living in hell, full of paranoia, separation from Terry and their 2 sons, and the bitter understanding that Motown still earned money from music he had created while he lay dying. Doctors and writers who looked back on his life tied the cause of his death directly to the damage his addictions had caused inside his body. He began using heroin around age 15 in the early 1970s, and later added cocaine and crack. That pattern punished his liver and immune system long before HIV appeared. By the late 1980s, he had already spent more than a decade riding a cycle of sobriety and relapse. His mother and siblings called drugs the force that paralyzed the DeBarge family's promise. When he learned he was HIV positive, likely during or around his late 1980s prison term, treatment options were still limited, and his weakened body could not fight the virus effectively. Hospice care became the final step once he grew gravely ill, and contemporary write-ups and obituaries list AIDS-related complications on top of long-term substance abuse as the cause of death.